It's midweek edition of Business Morning, and we're glad to have you. I am BC Adebayo. All futures are staging a recovery this morning, but still hovering around $42 per barrel, and that comes after U.S. crude stockpiles grew more than expected, adding to worries about oversupply. Earlier on, we saw Brent crude up 0.45% at $42.82 a barrel in early trading, while WTI crude futures gained 0.12% to $40.42 a barrel. Data from the American petroleum industry shows U.S. crude inventories rose by a much bigger than expected 1.7 million barrels last week, and that was well ahead of analyst expectations for a 300,000 barrel build. On Tuesday, both Brent and WTI contracts traded at their highest levels since prices collapsed in early March. And back home, the Central Bank of Nigeria says it will continue to pursue unification around the Nigerian autonomous foreign exchange rate for the INE window. According to the governor of the Apex Bank, Mr. Godwin Emefiele, Nigeria saw a relatively stable market as of December 2019, and that was because NAFEX and CBN rates were closer in value. Mr. Emefiele adds that the disparity between the parallel market and the NAFEX rate is because dealers are mostly not recognized by authorities due to sharp practices while dealing in the market. Now, the chairman, Senate Committee on Power, Senator Gabriel Soswam, is alarmed at what he describes as the lack of coordination in Nigeria's power sector. Senator Soswam, who spoke to journalists on the sidelines of a public hearing on the power sector, lamented that despite the huge funds pumped into the power sector, there's not much progress in terms of providing sufficient electricity to Nigerians. Let's take a listen.
Serious misalignment in the power sector. And the reason why, in spite of the huge expenditure, we've been unable to achieve anything has been because there's no proper coordination. And so once there is an alignment, there's proper coordination. That yes, if we generate 13,000 and transmission is able to transmit at least 10,000 and discos are able to absorb that 10,000 and there's proper tariff, it makes the sector solvent, the sector become liquid. We're spending huge amount of money paying for debt that is already owed. And you hear 701 billion. These are monies that are paid to money already owed to the generators. So that is not going to add anything. So we must begin to get out of that. Focus on how do we address the issue of the infrastructural deficit in the power sector. Let's spend money on metering. Let's at least meter about 80% of those who are connected to the network, and then be able to collect enough money to make the sector liquid. The problem is the insolvency of the sector. That is what the problem is.
And that's where we begin our conversation this morning with the director at the Eco Electricity Distribution Company, Mr. George Etomi. Good morning, Mr. Etomi. Thanks for coming on the program. So you were part of that investigative hearing by the Senate yesterday, and one issue that appeared evident is the blame game among stakeholders in the sector, particularly the management of operation or management of generation companies, distribution companies, and the transmission company of Nigeria, who presented contradictory positions on the poor state of power in the country. So I want to ask you, what exactly is the problem here?
Well, the real problem in the sector is that there has been a misalignment. After the privatization of the generating companies and the distribution companies, the transmission company of Nigeria was meant to be concessioned. That did not happen, and so it was still wholly left with the government. And what you then find are misalignments between the intentions from the supply end, that is starting with the gas producers through to the generating companies, and then before it gets to the discos. So what you now find is the blame game. So hopefully with the presidential task force now set up, we can begin to look at these areas of misalignments. But from the distribution company end of things, the reason why most people call on the discos is because they are the face of the industry. They are the ones who interact with the customers. But many people do not know what goes on behind the scenes. It is this alignment we are seeking to achieve. If you speak to most of the market participants, even amongst those who are in the government side of things, say TCN, NBET, even the BP, hardly do you speak to any one of them and you get a feeling that they understand the policy of government, which itself it's flip-flops. And then we have regulatory issues as well. The regulator tries to give teeth to any government policy, but when the inconsistency starts with the policy itself, regulation is affected. So we've had regulatory inconsistencies as well. One moment you are told to have fixed charges, the moment this next time the fixed charges are removed, another time they will have a tariff review, then they will say, oh, please don't implement it. And each day, because power is a wasting asset, each day you delay decisions like that, the funding gap becomes wider and wider. And of course, as you know, the fundamental problem in the value chain is liquidity. When you ask that distributors sell a product for less than its cost, and you don't give them a clear sight about how this difference will be met, these are the problems you meet.
And this brings us to the issue of the tariff review. Of course, recently, the Minister of Power, Salim Ahmed, made it clear that the new increment on electricity tariff will take effect in July. But the question on the lips of many is, why is there a need to increase electricity tariff in the first place?
There is a need to increase. I just wonder about the July 1 date, because in the middle of a pandemic, that would be a very difficult proposition to sell. But there is a need for a tariff increase, and that is because the bane of the sector is, as I told you, is that the cost of the product is actually the cost at which we sell, the price at which we sell the product is below the cost. Nigeria is the only country where electricity is priced so low. Ghana, Togo, all our neighboring countries, they buy power at the published rate. And this is what we should be doing. And that was the intention of the privatization. The idea was at the beginning that we would have a cost-reflective regime, and then we would then begin to align all the other things that make that happen. Metering, for example, is one of them, because metering, like I told you, is what creates the trust between the consumer and the distribution company. But even that, too, has been stalled because of, again, what I call policy inconsistency. We had CAPME, the Credited Advance Payment Metering implementation. That was ongoing, and then suddenly the regulator stopped it and introduced MAP, the meter asset provider. Now, in the middle of the meter asset provider trying to get in meters, the regulator sets a price ceiling for the meter. The meters come into the country, they slam them with customs duty that makes that product more expensive than what the regulator has already published. So it's a complete disincentive for anybody to work in such a market. So the meter asset provider scheme has not taken off. The only way you can get meters now is if a consumer is willing to pay the full cost of the meter, which will be so slow, because the idea behind MAP is that you will roll out meters in a mass fashion and then you work out a repayment scheme over a 10-year period. But I don't see that happening in the face of inconsistencies. And let us not forget the foreign exchange fluctuation as well. When all these things were being done, privatization, foreign exchange was 156, 157. It moved up to 199, then to 306, to 360. Now, in the parallel market, it's close to 450. How do you then price a product? Power is the only product that continues to remain what it is in spite of the macroeconomic changes all around them. These are the things MITO is meant to fix. But each time that's about to be done, for largely what I call political reasons, because of the sensitivity of electricity in political calculations, it is not done. And for as long as we don't do it, the burden is left with the federal government. Now enter COVID, enter oil price collapse. There's actually no more money to continue to support the sector, which is the reason you find this flurry of activities now to do what we should have done, in my opinion, 5, 6, 7 years ago, by which time you would have had some sustained implementation that will attract investments, that will ultimately then stabilize the sector. But like they say, the best time to do something was 5 years ago. The next best time is today. So we need to start today. There is a need for a price increase, but we must be sensitive to the times we live in. Hopefully, we can delay that for some time until we then get complete alignment. For example, you must have heard about the service reflective tariff. This tariff increase is actually predicated on service delivery, which means distribution companies are expected to guarantee a certain minimum of power supply to consumers and then charge appropriately for that. For that to happen, there are 5 bands being introduced: 4 hours, 6, I think 8, 16, 20, and so forth, and all that. So you now sign service levels agreements with these consumers, such that if you do not deliver those expected hours of supply, then you pay for it. In other words, the consumer pays for what he gets, which on paper is very good and which we support. But before that will work successfully, we must align the value chain. For example, if with all the best of intentions, the distribution company wants to give you 20 hours, and then we have a systems collapse from the transmission company, what happens? Who bears that cost? We're taking up this issue with the regulator. He says they will make the transmission company pay, but we know it's a government agency. They have very little control over them. So we need to get a proper alignment, because this is what the DISCOs have proposed right from the outset. In fact, it was the basis for the privatization. So we need to get to where we need to get to, but we also need to look at where we are today. That we're in the middle of a pandemic. We need to have some human face to whatever we're doing. But for now, as the DISCOs begin to segment their markets, as we are beginning to have conversations with the value chain for the first time, everybody is now talking, we can begin to straighten out all the loose ends until we then start off. And when we start off, you begin to hold everybody to their contracts. Right now, the misalignment is too much.
Now, assuming the new tariff comes into effect on July the 1st now, are you saying that that will guarantee an improvement in power supply?
Not across the board, and that's the reason I said that we need time to make all the adjustments that needs to be done. Because you need, for example, the regulator is telling us if the new tariffs come into place, then DISCOs will be expected to pay in full for whatever power is given to them. For that to happen, the DISCOs themselves want to know that there won't be disruptions from TCN. We need to know that the MDAs will pay their debts. We need to know how our books can be cleaned up, as was promised us at privatization, because all the debt in the sector is on our books. You keep hearing 1.7 trillion spent on the power sector. As the Senate Chair on Power explained to you, most of these debt monies went to legacy debts. They had nothing to do with what's going on currently. So we need to, again, using the word alignment, we need to align the entire sector. Now there are serious discussions going on, I can assure you, and it's really the way we want it to be. But we need for time for all these things to straighten out. Guarantee will be a problem. The only other way it can be guaranteed is if DISCOs get alternative power, which may be very expensive. But if consumers can tolerate it, we can try. But we need to move forward from where we are today.
But how much time do we have? Because consumers just want steady power supply. So how much time do we have to actually straighten these alignments that you've been talking about?
It will be incremental. It's not as if it's not started already. I'm sure you know of Magodo, it started. Even within the Electricity Distribution Company, we have consumers who get today up to 23 hours a day. It's already started. It was not massively deployed because of the tariff. There are consumer groups who meet us, who approach us today to say, look, give us the power and we will pay. And we're talking to those ones, and we're accelerating deployments. But you also do not want to discriminate in the market. Just like you are willing to give people 23 hours because it's germane to their business, you also don't want to neglect another group simply because they can't afford it. So we must try to achieve some degree of equity in the distribution of electricity. That's why you see it ranges from 4 hours. Some people will make do with 6 to 8 hours as long as it's given to them at the point at which they need it, until such a time as we can begin to do overall ramping up. Right now, the generating companies say they have 7,000 megawatts that they can deploy if it can be taken by TCN and the distribution companies. So let's go for that. That's partially what the Siemens arrangement is targeting. So let's go for that. But ultimately, the moment we reach that stage, you must also be thinking about how you can also ramp up distribution. Because if you look at the overall requirements in Nigeria for a 200 million population, even our generating levels are abysmally low. As an index of development, sustainable development goals tell you that for any country to develop steadily, you must have at least 1,000 megawatts to 1 million of your population, which means Nigeria should be looking anything towards 200,000 megawatts. In South Africa, where they have a population of 59 million thereabout, they have 45,000 megawatts. There's some degree of relationship between the population and the electricity they produce, and has a direct impact on their economic development. So what holds the key to the diversification of our economy is steady electricity, and I think that is where we will begin to do it. But I also urge consumers to pay, because many times people only look at the distribution companies. There are consumers who habitually refuse to pay for electricity. They would rather invest in bypassing and gaming the system than pay. It's ingrained in not everybody, but it's in many, many people. So as everybody begins to brace up, what I call the post-COVID response to the electricity market, we must all play our part. That your neighbor you know who is stealing power and you don't report, you will invariably bear his cost. So we must all put our hands on the deck.
All right, Mr. Itomi, you touched on the Siemens deal, of course, and the federal government, of course, we know that had signed an agreement with Siemens in July last year, a letter of agreement on the Nigerian electrification roadmap with the aim of ramping up electricity generation in the country to 25,000 megawatts in 6 years. And now the National Economic Council is saying that there is an urgent need for technical and financial audits of the discos in the country before interventions coming from Siemens, the World Bank, and the others. What's your opinion about this?
Well, this is a very sensitive area. Again, there are too many. We have one regulator, which is the National Electricity Regulatory Commission, but too many pronouncements are coming from too many quarters. Some are politically motivated. Some, yes, there is an urgency to get things done. You see, the net effect is that it creates confusion in the marketplace. For as long as we think that power is limited to this environment, we can do whatever we like. But the truth is that the deep pockets who will come and invest in a sustainable market or in a sustainable manner are put off by these inconsistent pronouncements. We got a letter from the regulator saying they want to do a forensic audit. The matter is in court, so I'm actually very reluctant to pronounce on it. But we want to be sure what this audit is meant to achieve, really, because they do open book exercises. They've done it every year since we got privatized. I don't know what the audit is meant to, we don't know what it's meant to achieve. It's such a distraction from the main business. There is illiquidity in the sector, and we need to address it. Everybody who knows about power knows that that mismatch is the main reason for the problem. Let's go and deal with it dispassionately. Why are the ministries, departments, and agencies not paying for power? It's not right. And you take them out of the power equation, it increases the ATC and C losses for the discos, and yet discos cannot recover it. It's just such, these are the misalignments I'm talking about. Let us all come back and straighten it. These are Nigerians who've invested in their country. They need to be protected. They need to feel that their efforts are appreciated. But every time it's just been pointing, accusing fingers. They have done this, they have done that. No facts. Everybody's an expert in power, and everybody just says what comes first to them, not minding the effect on the investments and the overall investment climate in the country. Because if you've signed agreements, you don't respect them, the sanctity of contract is so important. Nobody will take us seriously internationally. You can't sign contracts and then walk away from them.
Mr. George Etomi, thanks. I know that this conversation could go on, but we're pressed for time and we need to wrap up at this time. Thank you so much for coming on Business Morning, and to enjoy the rest of your day.
My pleasure.
Welcome back. COVID-19 no doubt came with a lot of disruptions to not just the way we live, but the way we do our work and businesses. And that brings to the fore the need for governance for business resilience. And experts say this entails leading from the top. And so what are some of the pertinent boardroom issues bordering on how companies can respond to business disruption in the face of the COVID-19 pandemic? Well, joining me to discuss this is the Governance and Risk Management Partner at Ernst & Young, Benson Oweru, who is here with us in the studio. Good morning, and thank you for coming on the program.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
All right, let's begin this conversation with you telling us how critical would you assess the tone at the top to the success of an organization, of course, as it navigates towards the new normal given the COVID-19 pandemic?
Thank you very much. I think that the new normal, as you rightly call it, is part of the reality that we all have to deal with. And more than ever before, the tone at the top, which is a tone that is set by the leadership, the board of directors, is very important. In the normal situation, it was important. In the critical moments like this, it's even much more important. Board of directors have a responsibility to set that tone. And because of the experience and the wisdom that the board and its members have, it's important to bring that weight of wisdom and experience in setting the tone. And one of the things that is critical to also note is that the board also has responsibility to ensure that the tone that is set is also lived. So how does that connect to the values of the organization? And in terms of the communication, in terms of the kind of incentives to promote, the right culture in the organization. These are very crucial times, and I think that more than ever before, it's important that that tone is set. Now we're talking about reopening of organizations, and as we think about that, we also need to ensure that the communication that comes from the board is clear, is precise, and is able to help lead the organization out of the crisis, even beyond the COVID-19 pandemic. Thank you.
Now, how can institutions actually ensure that they are well prepared and, they have the necessary procedures in place to handle the phased reopening, just as you talked about now, and return to normal operations in a manner that is still socially responsible?
So the phased reopening is a very critical stage, especially when you think of the COVID-19 pandemic that we're dealing with. I think organizations, particularly the board, must engage with management to structure the kind of reopening that is needed for the organizations to continue to operate in this kind of times. What do I mean? We have to particularly pay attention to employee safety. So when you are reopening, it's important to place at the fore the whole arrangement around the safety, okay, the well-being and the health of your employee, which is very important at the foundation of that decision. So it's a very thoughtful decision that organizations have to make, particularly the board. So management has to engage with the board to give assurance regarding the process of reopening. What we have seen is some organizations, particularly for example, EY, for example, we have actually opened, but it's been phased. And before we opened, we took very specific measures to ensure that all the necessary pre-opening protective and safety precautions are made. And also we ensure that at a particular point in time, only an amount of employees are allowed into the office. All the needed PPEs, personal protective equipment, are in place. and that also the necessary technology infrastructure is available to support our employees. So we have the two phases, some employees who are in the office and those who are also working remotely. And as we navigate this pandemic, lots more of employees would actually work remotely. And I think it is important that the board is on top of that decision, engaging with management and also paying attention to the safety and the health of their employees.
And now, how can directors actually ensure that critical lessons drawn from the front lines are actually brought to the fore of the board and incorporated into strategic decision making?
So I think the lessons learned from this whole crisis is useful for leadership, for governance of institution. And it's important that that lesson is brought into the business. Now, I give you an example. There's a supermarket chain, for example, a big supermarket chain that had to design a WhatsApp chat box. And actually what they did was, in designing the chat box with the data of their customers, they were able to send messages to their customers to let them know the most quiet times to come for shopping. So that way, they are able to reduce the measure of interactions or customers crowding the mall, and also helping to social distance, which is part of COVID-19 measures to reduce the spread of the virus. So that's bringing lessons learned. Also, it's important that from the feedback we've gotten from NCDC and all the regulators, we need to apply some of the lessons that we're seeing. The virus has not gone. We are seeing the spikes and the increase, in the coronavirus. People are contacting it every day. So we all need to stay safe, and I think that the board must pay attention to that and get assurances from management. And also, that should also form part of the business strategy going forward. How do we begin to reflect the lessons learned in our strategy? How do we review our operations? What do we do with our employees? And how do we guarantee that business as usual will continue in the organization?
And from what you've talked about, of course, using the supermarket as an example, now we see that technology actually has a role to play here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And that's a very critical component, because more than ever before, the talent management conversation is now even more critical, because you have employees who need to be technology savvy, who are able to use technology more efficiently because of remote work. So, and that also creates a potential cyber risk and technology risk, because people are going to be working remotely. We need to secure our networks and ensure that even while at home or wherever they're working from, there's a measure of confidence that the business is protected and that our customers and our general stakeholders are also protected. So it's a real conversation, and this is the new normal, like we all say. And I think that the board has a critical role to play to also provide governance and leadership for the organization in these very crucial moments.
But there are some board members who would believe, why should a staff work from home? Why do I have to pay that staff, his or her full salary, he's working from home? What would you say about that?
Yeah, I think that conversation is ongoing. Why do you need to pay? But you see, the truth is, work from home, like you already know, is now a new reality. And there are measures organizations are putting in place to promote efficiency. So what is the return on investment? How do you ensure employees are productive? How do they continue to deliver value for the organization? So it's actually the conversation around the measure of value that we place on our employees. And don't forget that keeping your employees safe is the foundation for, for every organization who has value, delivery at its center. So once we have that conversation, it's important that we endeavor, as a matter of fact, to make sure that we provide the necessary support for our employees to continue to produce results, to engage with the organization. And once we see that value, that conversation, I don't think, would be a challenge. And so productivity is one of the key determinants, to ensure that our employees remain, relevant to our business. We've seen instances where also board members and even executives had to, forgo some of their packages, their salaries at sacrifice to keep the employees, going in the organization. So organizations must have the conversation around the value creation for the business. And at the center of it is our employees. And we must ensure that first and foremost they're protected, but also determine how productive in terms of their contribution to the business.
But some would also argue that not all, jobs can be done remotely. Some have to be physically present. How about that argument?
Yes, so there are those arguments around physical presence in the office, and what we have seen, like you rightly alluded to, is the use of technology. And more than ever before, artificial intelligence and robotics are becoming, measures through which organizations are reducing, the physical presence of employees, digitizing processes, and ensuring that the organization becomes more agile and nimble in its business operations. So for those services or operations where, it is very important for employees to be in the office, what we normally say is that the minimum precautionary measure is to put in place those safety nets, okay? And that means we must make sure that the environment is safe. All the necessary safety guards have to be in place. And once we get those assurances, therefore we can continue to allow such employees, in the environment to operate.
Now, how can the board actually use diversity to promote good corporate governance practices in an organization?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Diversity is a big success factor for organizations who understand its impact and implication. And the United Nations actually recommends 30% from a gender diversity point of view for boards, and we've seen a lot of our companies here in Nigeria, particularly, paying more attention to gender diversity, which is now like a new norm. But interestingly, we can also look at diversity from other perspectives, okay? There's diversity in terms of experience. Now, in a pandemic of this nature, you want to be able to bring into your board a diversity that brings in people with various backgrounds. Technology is becoming big now, because we are working remotely. So we need to ensure that on the board we have the diversity of experience. So there's a balance of people with varied experiences in the boardroom, and they bring that experience to be in the business. We also have diversity in terms of race, age. People are talking about millennials and Generation Z, and people are asking, what do we need to do? Organizations currently are actually thinking of bringing millennials into the board, just to have a blend of skill sets, to help with the robustness of conversations as well as deliberations in the boardroom, which will lead to quality decision making and for the overall good of the organization. So we can look at diversity from the lens of a number of factors. So there's a gender diversity, there's experience in diversity, there's race in diversity, and age also, like I mentioned. So bringing diversity as a key success factor is critical for most organizations who truly are futuristic and also want to thrive in the new normal.
Now, to what extent does the existing culture within an organization actually impact the communication and implementation of board decisions, and how can we actually promote the right culture within our organizations?
So culture is the foundation of any organization. It's the way we do things around here. And you can tell an organization just by its culture. And it's important because more than ever before, organizations post-COVID-19 era would be measured by the quality of culture that they have. And one of the key things that I have advocated is that the board sets the culture for the organization. It starts from the top. So we talked about the tone at the top. Culture actually is that foundation, because when we communicate or set the tone, what we are doing is a set of values, defining a set of norms and practices that regulate our behaviors in the organization. So the board has that responsibility for defining the culture of the organization. The culture has to be very clear. It has to be consistent. It has to be precise. And beyond just setting the tone through the culture, there must be exemplary behaviors. how do we also reward good behaviors in the organization? You often hear people being, punished, for breaching the rules or breaching the culture in the organization. It's also part of a culture where people are rewarded, are incentivized for demonstrating and exhibiting good behaviors in the organization. So culture is the foundation. And I advocate that organizations, especially in these times, must think of a culture of innovation, okay? And a culture of entrepreneurship, because these are the times where organizations need to now reinvent themselves, beyond COVID-19 to be able to position themselves to continue to create value for the bigger stakeholders. So it's a critical component for success in any organization, and I think that culture is very important for most businesses in times like this.
And with all of this now, how can boards actually ensure that employees who are actually key stakeholders in this now are best protected while implementing crisis management initiatives?
So I said employee safety is first and foremost, and the board must pay attention to the safety of employees. And very importantly also is the fact that because no organization operates in isolation, employees make the difference. They are responsible, for generating revenues. They're responsible for the operations of the business. And we must ensure that they are safe. And so the board must, in consonant with the management, or management working with the board, must provide those assurances that our employees are safe. And that includes making sure that the environment where our employees work or where they will be returning to when the lockdown is completely over is a safe and secured environment. We must also protect them by ensuring that we give them the assurances. In EY, for example, we have one of our values, humans at the center. Humans are always going to be at the center of everything we do because they make all the difference. And once we identify humans at the center, then we now begin to put in place those measures that give them comfort and assurances that they are first and foremost the most important assets in every organization.
Thank you. Governance and Risk Management Partner at Ernst & Young, Benson Owero. Thanks for coming.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And it's time now to review the equities market performance. And investors' mood remained subdued on Tuesday. We saw the all-share index decline marginally by 0.01% to 24,751.32, and that brought the month-to-date and year-to-date losses to minus 2.0% and minus 7.8% respectively. But let's get a better picture of what happened at the market yesterday from a stockbroker at Securities and Funds, Mohammed Jamiu, who joins us now via telephone. Good morning, Mr. Jamiu, for speaking with us. Now, although we saw some moderation yesterday, the market still tilted towards the south. What's going on?
Hello?
If you can hear me, I was asking that we saw the market tilt towards the south yesterday. What exactly is going on?
Yes, the market has been a bit around the southwest direction in the recent time. Though what we expect the market to have been trending upwards instead of what we are seeing now. So the impact of what we saw yesterday is just like the market is trying to rebound. But the problem we are having now is that everybody is a bit cautious about the market because of the fact that...
Right, that was stockbroker at Equities, Securities and Funds, Mohammed Jamiu. Seems to have lost the connection there. But reading out the numbers, there was actually a wide margin between the number of gainers and losers at the markets yesterday. Unity Bank and Dangote Sugar were the top losers for the day, and we saw UAC Property and Transcore record the largest gains, of course, and sectoral performance was broadly negative as all sector indices declined except the oil and gas index. And still to come on the program, we'll cross over to London, plus a look at activities at the debt and currencies market. Please stay with us. Juliana Olayinka is ready to analyze this morning's major business headlines coming from the UK. Good morning, Juliana. So the Prime Minister yesterday announced that he has dropped the 2-meter rule in favor of a 1-meter plus approach. But are Londoners comfortable with this, considering the fear of a second wave of infections?
Good morning, Bissy. Are Londoners comfortable? I think the overwhelming answer is yes, of course, they are comfortable. I think everybody around the world who's been in lockdown these past 3 to 4 months are desperate to get out, even if there is a fear of the coronavirus, even if there is a fear and mounting speculation that a second wave is about to hit Britain's shores. The natural inclination of human beings is to be out and about. And I believe there is certainly a sense of relief that finally we are getting into the final stages of an ease in lockdown in Britain. I think the government have realised that the decision to start opening the hospitality sector on July the 4th, and it had to be a political decision. It had to be an economic and a business decision. The scientific advisors have been speaking all morning on British media, and they think it's shockingly risky. They don't believe that we have a firm grip on the infection as we should. And of course, the coronavirus hasn't gone away. The risk of infecting others has, but it's still very much in the atmosphere. But to answer that question, I think yes. There were choruses of hallelujah in the chambers of the House of Commons yesterday. And on July the 4th, which happens to be a Saturday, when most pubs are open, I suspect that on Sunday morning there will be some very interesting, lively pictures taking the front pages of British newspapers.
So it looks like it's going to be a bumper weekend. But now the issue of inequality has propped up again, with the Office for National Statistics reporting that white households in the UK have incomes 63% higher than black households, and even after taxes and benefits are nearly a fifth better off. What is the reason for this gap, and does this data actually matter to the UK government?
Yes, I think, I think it would almost be improper for me to say whether or not it matters to the UK government. The answer, of course, is yes, it should matter, because the government govern every individual in Britain. It doesn't matter what creed or colour you are. But then, of course, if you look at this data, it shows that there is definitely a mounting gap. And this has been a discussion amongst individuals in the UK for years, particularly in the past couple of years. And some would even go back further and say under the Conservative government, where austerity appears to be a theme that has trickled down throughout the years. I think the ethnicity pay gap is a huge issue here in the UK. And one of the issues surrounding the ethnicity pay gap is here in Britain, a lot of people are not really comfortable about disclosing how much they're earning. So, an employer may offer you this salary as a black male, and your white counterpart may be on a higher salary. But because this information isn't discussed amongst peers, a lot of people don't know. So a lot of companies are getting away with doing this. So it definitely does appear as if diversity and inclusion in some workplaces is just not benefiting people of colour, particularly the Asians and the blacks. However, this information from the Office of National Statistics, although recent, it is 2019, it is still before the pandemic, still before the civil uprising that we saw in America and that we've seen trickle here. There are many discussions. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has opened many different intergovernmental inquiries, which are being headed up by some leading figures within politics from the black and minority ethnic community. So we are going to start seeing some reaction and some legislation that will assist in trying to break down these inequalities. There's no denying that they do exist. And some would say that's down to the structural reform, institutionalized racism that does predate Boris Johnson's government. But, to answer that question about whether or not the government care, the answer, of course, has to be yes. That's what one would hope from a G7 westernized country like Britain.
Now, UK ministers are set to be in talks to create air bridges with a number of core European countries, including Spain, Italy, Greece, France, Turkey, and Croatia. But what would that mean for the UK and these European countries?
Well, what that means is that you will not need to quarantine if you travel to those countries. So it's a vacuum. It's also called a travel corridor, a travel vacuum. We do know that a lot of countries are just starting to open their borders, including Britain, whose borders are open at the moment. But if you come here since June the 8th, you've had to quarantine for 14 days. This has caused complete outcry within the industry. In fact, that's led to some airlines even trying to take the government to court to try and reverse this decision. And this is just the beginning of the peak summer holiday period. British tourists love to sunbathe on the beach, and there are so many organisations that are trying to still maintain that happening. There was one chief exec that actually called quarantine an enemy of the tourism industry, which is, pretty strong words there. So yes, government bodies from here and across Europe are talking to one another to try and maintain some sort of air bubble for tourists from each of those countries. So when you travel to Spain, if you live in Britain, or you travel to Portugal or Greece or Turkey, as you mentioned, you won't have to quarantine. So there are still hopes, and fingers are being crossed in Britain that they may indeed be able to enjoy a summer holiday in the next couple of weeks if these travel corridors can be agreed.
We'll see how that goes. Thank you, Juliana, and we'll see you again in the afternoon. And let's review some of the numbers again from the Nigeria equities market. Of course, we saw investors' moods that actually remained subdued on Tuesday, and the all-share index declined marginally by 0.01% to 24,751.32, and that brought the month-to-date and year-to-date losses to -2.0 and -7.8 respectively. And there was a wide margin between the number of gainers and losers. Of course, Unity Bank and Dangote Sugar were the top losers for the day, and UAC Property and Transcore recorded the largest gain. Sectoral performance was broadly negative as all sector indices declined except the oil and gas index. And let's delve right away into the debt and currencies market, and we're being joined by a fixed income dealer at GT Bank, Chioma Udu. Good morning, Chioma. Thanks for joining us. Now, talk us through yesterday's activities at the fixed income market.
Hello, BC. Good morning. Thank you for having me. The fixed income market remains quiet. When we go to the T-bills curve, it's just a quiet market. We saw a little trade here and there at the long end of the T-bill curve where we saw some investors trying to discount to get cash because the money market is quite illiquid. We have only 29 billion in the market, so we've seen some rediscounting at the T-bill space. However, in the bond space, we continue to see investors grab bargain buys across the benchmark curve. We noticed some scarcity on the offers shown at the 2021, 2023, and 2030s. However, rates across the curve, the yield curve, hovered from 5% to 12, sub 12.
And what direction are we likely to see the markets today?
The bond space, we're going to continue to see bargain buys. We'll see investors trying to grab any asset they can find because of the scarcity of assets. CBN has not been replacing almost as much as they are maturing, so we've seen a deficit in that space. Then there's no auction throughout this month, so we're going to see a lot of grabbing of assets by investors.
Fixed income dealer at GT Bank, Chioma Udu. Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And that's where we wrap up today's program. Thank you for watching. I am BC Adebayo.